Good evening. I think we are ready to start. My name is Anthony Pillay. On behalf of the Psychological Society of South Africa, I want to extend a warm welcome to all of you to this webinar on tele-mental health in the digital age, prospects, pitfalls, and provocations for psychological interventions beyond COVID-19. This is such a relevant topic, but I think actually the latter part of this title may actually have even greater significance. Because while we might think that COVID-19 has thrown our lives upside down, we need to also prepare for life thereafter. Even when a vaccine does arrive, there is every indication that our planet could see more and different viral epidemics in the future. And the science is confirming this. Climate change is a major culprit in this respect. Of course, it's of our own making anyway. Clearly, our abuse of our natural environment is coming back to haunt us. We have to take this issue very seriously. There can be no place for denialism here. This webinar is the third in a series that SAISA has organized during the 2020 COVID-19 lockdown period. All have been well attended, and we hope that you will find this one as useful and informative as the previous sessions have been. We're very fortunate that SAISA has been able to provide these continuing education programs free of charge, which is a crucial benefit at this time when many have experienced reductions in income. With the public health strategies needed to curb the spread of the virus, mental health consultations, like other areas of healthcare, have shifted from the traditional face-to-face format to online platforms. These have been necessary and may continue to be necessary for a long time. But several issues and questions accompany this shift. We know, for example, that not all practitioners have moved towards or embraced the online consultation approach. Most of us have not been trained in this format, and some are hesitant about using this method. It is against this background, and especially the relative novelty of online consulting or telepsychology or tele-mental health, that SAISA decided on this webinar. The Society has also been aware that some practitioners have struggled with telepsychology related issues, such as ethics, legal aspects, the mode of service delivery, the applicability of different therapeutic modalities, and several other challenges. To this end, we have assembled an experienced panel of practitioners who have been consulting online, and we're looking forward to them sharing their experiences. We hope that many of your concerns and questions in the area will be addressed as various issues relating to tele-mental health unfold over the next 2 hours. So in terms of our format from here, we're going to have each of the 4 presenters speaking for about 15 to 20 minutes. We will engage in a broader discussion thereafter. So if you have any questions or comments that you wish to raise, please type them into the chat and we will try to get to them. But we do ask that you keep them as short and concise as possible, especially considering the large number of attendees to this webinar, which of course we're very pleased about. And it shows the level of interest in this particular webinar and the series. So with that short preface, let's get started. Our first speaker is Dylan Evans. Dylan is a clinical psychologist working in private practice and also at Fort Napier Hospital in Pietermaritzburg. where he is involved in intern psychology training. He is a little bit of a geek and enjoys tinkering with technology, and therefore has an interest in the applications of technology in psychotherapeutic practice. This has led to research on how psychologists use technology in their practices, and also the development of initial guidelines for telepsychology in South Africa. Just to remind you, Dylan's work in this respect has been endorsed by SAISA and is on the website. So please feel free to consult them. They're really very useful guidelines. Before handing over to Dylan, I just want to add that I've had the good fortune to know Dylan for the past 20 years or so, and I have yet to find an IT question that he can't answer. But I will keep trying. So Dylan, over to you.
Great, thank you, Anthony, for that introduction. Just checking that everyone can see and hear me okay before I carry on.
Yes, Dylan, I think we all can hear you.
Okay, great. Yes, thanks, Anthony. Thanks, SAISA, for inviting me to speak. And yeah, specifically, I'm going to be speaking today on some of the ethical issues involved and some of the technological issues involved around software and hardware around online therapy. But before I do that, I think let's just start off and share some of my experiences of doing online therapy. Before the COVID pandemic, I already had started to do some online therapy, but mostly with clients who either were pre-existing clients and were traveling and wanted to maintain continuity of treatment, or sometimes I got requests from clients who were living in countries where they couldn't access psychological services in their own language, and so they reached out for help. I only did it with clients who asked for that format and were comfortable with the tech around it. And I think this gave me a false sense of security. So when the COVID pandemic hit, I thought, I can do this, it's probably going to be fine. But I think I learned very quickly that trying to move your entire practice online with a wide range of clients, with wide ranges of issues and various capabilities in terms of technology, that was a whole different kettle of fish. I've had some really surprising intimate moments. I've got to see some of my clients in their most kind of personal worlds. I've met many pets along the way. I've had family members barging into their rooms, being introduced online. I've had tours of people's homes. So in some ways, the medium has really allowed me to have very intimate views of my clients and for them to share this with me. One interesting experience, I had a South African client living abroad who ended up breaking down in tears because they became so homesick after hearing the sound of hardy-dars going crazy in my garden. It's funny how just hearing that noise made this person so homesick. I've had the therapy reach new depths of work using the online medium. Interestingly, some clients who felt just too exposed with the intensity of face-to-face work, I was really surprised that when we did it online, they seemed to feel less vulnerable and were able to open up and work at a deeper level. But I've also had the opposite experience where pre-existing clients who we were working with at quite a deep level really struggled to connect over the online medium and ended up abandoning it. I've also had clients experience my own personal world, mostly unintendedly. I've had my children leopard crawling under my feet to get their shoes out of their cupboard because I was using their room as my home office. My pets have every now and then become my co-therapists and have interrupted my sessions with barking and begging to be fed and howling in the background. I've also had huge challenges with clients not having privacy in their homes. I've had to become very good at reading sign language as clients try and communicate about family members who are in the next room. I've had clients who've had to use their cars as their private spaces to have therapy. And then I've also had huge frustrations using this medium. I've been ready to absolutely lose my cool and smash the computer as the session freezes for the 10th time in a row. But I try and carry on looking calm and collected at the webcam just in case my client is not having the same problems and can see everything absolutely fine. I've had sessions where I've had to move from Zoom to using WhatsApp. And then when that bombs finally to the good old cell phone, all in a single session. I've tried to do group interventions with an organization where nobody would switch on their video because of data constraints, and everybody was reluctant to speak, and come away from that intervention feeling completely inadequate. I've also ended many days feeling very exhausted after spending the whole day staring at a screen, trying to read clients' emotions from a very limited pool of nonverbal cues that you get online, just the face. So yes, I found this is a whole new terrain with many challenges. And I suppose the question we need to ask is, how do we practice ethically using this medium, but also remain responsive and flexible to our client needs? So with that in mind, I'm going to look at a number of the ethical issues that I think are central when using online psychology. Okay, I'm going to briefly look, and because of time constraints, I can't go into it too much, but I think the areas I'm going to try and look at is the issue of what's in the best interest of the client, which is obviously a central organizing principle when doing any intervention. And then we'll look at competence, the issues around confidentiality, which often are the central concern of most therapists, issues around professional boundaries, legal and regulatory issues, crisis management, which can be very difficult with online psychology, and then issues around consent. So the best interests of the client. I mean, obviously this is central to all our work. And so I think, when using online therapy, we need to make sure that we're using it because it's in the client's best interests, not in the therapist's best interests. So yes, it can be a very effective medium, and there's a strong research base to support that it is very effective and can be very effective. But I really think it's not the most useful in every situation. I think we need to be very careful about choosing this medium for those clients where it's needed, and possibly for clients which might do better with other mediums such as face-to-face, we might need to recommend it. We also need to look at, it's very useful to maintain continuity of care with certain clients, but sometimes we might also be avoiding termination with clients, which might be healthy for them. And we also need to look at what's convenient and whose convenience it is, for our convenience, our client's convenience. But also sometimes I think we need to look at what the client's real needs are, not what is just most convenient. So there are times when I think online therapy may be contraindicated, and that's if the client has a very high risk in terms of suicidality or homicidality, that their functioning is relatively low, and that they're not competent in using or don't have access to the technology to do online therapy or the data or bandwidth required to do that. And then the best thing might be to refer on. Okay. The next ethical issue is competence. Now, for me, obviously, competence in providing whatever psychological intervention is a given. But when it comes to online psychology and telepsychology, I think as psychologists, we need to make sure that we're competent in using the online medium and adapting interventions to this medium. And we need to have the skills to manage any potential risks posed by the technology. But not only our competence, I think we need to assess our clients' competence in using the technology required. And you might need to actually assist clients directly with gaining the skills or helping them. I mean, I've had situations where I've had to remotely log into a client's laptop and enable their camera for them, just to help them to be able to connect. So you need to make sure that your client is also competent and help them gain those skills. Okay, so that's competence. The next biggest issue I think that concerns many is confidentiality. And it's obvious. As psychologists, we need to take all reasonable precautionary efforts to protect and maintain the confidentiality of the data information relating to our clients when using online technology. The problem is using data, when data flows online, it's a lot more difficult to protect the confidentiality. With face-to-face, it's simple. The data flows in one room between you and another person, and as long as you have a private room that is secure, it's confidential. But on online, the data moves through different levels. It goes from the user to the device, from the device to the router, from the router through to the network, and then onto servers, and it does a round trip back to the other person's device. And confidentiality can be compromised on each step of the way. So at the user level, that's where the environment that the user is in, we need to make sure that the user is in a private environment and not doesn't have a whole lot of interruptions. Okay, at the device level, we need to make sure that the device is password protected or has some security on it that enables nobody else to get access to that device while the person is conducting a session. So things like keeping software updated, etc., is quite important at a device level. Then there's the issue of, well, information is in transit between the device and the router and the various servers. And for that, you need to make sure that whatever information is being sent, that it's encrypted. Okay. And then when the information is on a remote server, such as a Microsoft server or a Zoom server, you need to be aware that and ask yourself the question, is that information encrypted when it's on the server, or can somebody in that organization access that information? Okay. So you just need to be aware of confidentiality at all those different levels. Okay, the device, the user, while it's in transit, and then at the server level. Okay. Now, probably the thing that concerns most people is whether the information is confidential while it's moving between two devices. And there's different types of encryption. There's transport encryption, and that just means while the data leaves your device, it's encrypted until it reaches the remote server, and then it's not encrypted. And then you get something called end-to-end encryption. And I think that's kind of the gold standard. In that kind of encryption, the data is scrambled as it leaves your device and is never decrypted until it gets to the other person's device. Okay. The tricky thing with that is that often it means that data can flow much slower, that the servers can't process the data, and a lot of the usability can be affected when it is end-to-end encrypted. So often you've got to choose, there's a balancing act between security and then usability and accessibility when it comes to encryption. And then, we need to think about, when we're using specific software, things like waiting room functions and making sure people can't Zoom bomb and just come into a session without first going into a waiting room and being admitted. Passcodes, locking the room. So you just need to think about that with confidentiality. Okay. The next ethical issue, I'm just looking at time. Okay, 13 minutes. I need to move it. We look at professional boundaries. Now, the tricky thing with the online space and the internet is it's a space where anything goes, and accountability is often reduced, where anyone, regardless of their training, can offer services and set up a website. And I think here we need to be careful as psychologists, and we need to maintain professional standards when using this medium, and also maintain appropriate professional boundaries. So to keep these boundaries and maintain these professional boundaries, we need to help clients verify our personal registrations and assess our expertise through our websites, or the ability to check with the HPCSA on our registration status, etc. We need to maintain the same level of professionalism regardless of the communication medium used. So often when you're doing work online, there's a tendency to try and be more relaxed, dress more relaxed. I mean, I'm guilty of doing a session with a pair of shorts on and a collared shirt on. And it's very easy to start kind of becoming a little bit less professional in the way you communicate. I think one needs to be quite careful about that. You also need to, in terms of boundaries, communicate what your availability is, how often you'll respond, because when it comes to online interactions, people often expect immediate responses. Okay, and then it's also important with online work is to manage your self-disclosure on social media and just check, because if your clients are tech savvy and you're doing work online, they're going to be checking up on you online and researching things online. Okay, the next ethical issue I want to look at is the legal and regulatory issues. And yeah, this is an area where there are some grey areas as the regulatory frameworks around online therapy are being developed. I think the biggest issue is that you need to make your clients aware what the legal recourse is. And for me, it's that it'll take place through the HPCSA. So I know there's a big question of whether we can do therapy across jurisdictional or international boundaries. And I haven't found documents that make that completely clear yet. But I think the basic issue for me is that you need to make sure that your clients give informed consent and that they're aware that their legal recourse may be limited across international boundaries because you are registered in South Africa. Another thing with legal and regulatory issues is to just check that your malpractice covers online work and what platforms they are comfortable with. Okay. The next ethical issue is around crisis management, and this can be quite a difficult thing with online therapy because clients are often not in the same location as you, and it's very easy for clients to cut communication, go off the radar, and you can struggle to contact them. So I think here we need to be quite preemptive and prepare for future emergency situations by developing a crisis support plan collaboratively with our client before it happens. And I always try to obtain the contact details of a local friend who stays where the client stays, and a local medical practitioner, so that in the case of an emergency, I can contact somebody locally who could potentially, go to that person's house and help them in an emergency. And then there's the ethical issue of informed consent. And I think obviously we need to get conformed consent that addresses specific information around the risks to confidentiality, the technology and skills required to use online therapy, the structure and timing of services provided, billing, and then the crisis management strategies that will be used. Okay. I'm going to move now quickly because I'm running out of time, look at some of the technological issues and specifically the hardware and the software. So I found with the hardware setup, for me, it's important to have a large screen. I struggle to do online therapy with a small little cell phone screen or even a small tablet. I prefer a large screen where my client's face can almost be life-size. It's important for you to look at how your face looks like and to kind of consider, your setup as your virtual office. So your face needs to be well lit, not backlit. You need to look at what your background looks like and try and create a consistent virtual office that is the same for each session so that you can create the therapeutic frame, but to do it virtually. Another issue with the hardware setup is eye contact. So you need to minimize the space between the client's eye on the monitor and your webcam so that when you're looking at the client's eyes on the screen, it's very close to where your webcam is situated, and that will simulate eye-to-eye contact. If there's a big gap to where the client's eyes are and the webcam is, you're not going to be making eye contact with your client. Now, the biggest issue and the biggest struggle I think that many people have is network issues, especially in South Africa, where often we have unreliable network. I think it's important, if you're going to do this, you need to get a good, strong, robust connection of at least 2 to 4 megabits connection, both up and down. You need to have low, what's called pings, which is the how quick the data travels between servers, and it needs to be at least below 250 milliseconds. Otherwise, you get this delay. And then obviously you need to have enough data, and your client needs to have enough data, and video conferencing can eat data. Maybe a gig an hour you need to plan for. Okay. I find it very useful to also just have some procedures that you all agree on, that when there are inevitable technological difficulties during the sessions, that you have a backup procedure, that you can reconnect, or then attempt to, if that doesn't work, reconnect on a different service, and ultimately have a way to contact your client to reschedule a session so that they don't feel abandoned if there's any tech issues. Okay, and then in terms of software, obviously whatever you choose to use needs to be secure, it needs to be accessible and easily usable on a wide range of devices. Because your client needs to obviously be able to connect. And I've found Zoom to be the most useful for me. There's also another one, Doxy, which is useful, and WhatsApp has also been useful at times. Although WhatsApp can be a little bit tricky because it introduces a whole lot of boundary issues with social media. I think, Anthony, I'm going to stop there so that I don't run over time, but I'm sure we'll discuss things more after all the other presenters have had their chance.
Thank you, Dylan. I think you've been quite comprehensive there in the range of ethical, legal, and even social issues that you've covered. Yes, I agree with you. There's certainly going to be a number of questions and concerns and comments that come up later. So we'll tackle that in those in that session. Just one thing. I saw a question. Somebody was wanting to know where to access your guidelines. Dylan's guidelines on ethics in telepsychology are actually located on the CISA website, and it's also a South African Journal of Psychology article, so it's available there.
Okay, I'll put a link in the comments while when other speaker.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you, Dylan. Thanks. We'll talk to you again later.
Thank you. Great.
Thanks. Thanks. Now we will move to our second speaker for the evening, and he is Dr. Hamadi Kometsi, who is a clinical psychologist and senior lecturer at the University of Johannesburg. He has taught both at UCT and at WITS in the past, and has recently rejoined the academy following a stint as a manager in the public sector. Dr. Kometsi has a private practice in Highlands North, where he practices a psychoanalytically influenced psychotherapy. I can also add that Hamadi served with us on the CISA executive a few years ago. So, Hamadi, it's over to you if you can take over. Thanks.
Thank you, and good evening, everyone. And thanks to CISA for the opportunity to come and share a few thoughts in regards to the topic at hand. And I want to emphasize that really, these are just thoughts at the moment, because one would appreciate that this is a fairly new phenomenon that we're dealing with. But I think it is important not to undermine its importance and the impact it has on the service that we provide. So I'm going to be talking from a psychoanalytic perspective, to a certain extent, And I'll craft out what specifically I would like to talk about, regarding the psychoanalytic psychotherapy. Perhaps to start off with, I have to somehow prepare the audience by indicating what it is that I'm trying to do with this presentation. So the first thing that I'm trying to do is to attempt a reading of the session, of the setting, the psychoanalytic setting, being the metaphorical place or space where the work that is done psychoanalytically by the therapist and the patient happen. So I want to make some comments in regard to that. And I also want to make certain suggestions, perhaps by talking to a particular case that I've dealt with, to share some notes regarding what kind of a patient should we be seeing utilizing these online platforms. Now, to expatiate on that a little bit more, the magnitude of this pandemic, of COVID, particularly its impact on psychotherapy, being the service that we provide as psychologists, should not be undermined. Our encounter with this pandemic should be seen as some kind of a defining moment. Almost, if you like, if you look back, some of the big, moments in history, the world wars, and the implications and what we read out of those experiences, out of those events, PTSD became a much more clearer category to diagnose, and it still survives in the DSM even today. So similarly, I would like to believe that, that COVID is going to leave behind a legacy on our profession, on how we provide services, a legacy that we should not waste time, we should engage with now already as we do now. I did say that I'll talk a little bit about, the kind of patient that could be indicated for online, psychotherapy as well. And I'm talking from the psychoanalytic perspective, particularly, as you would know, colleagues, there are a whole lot of observances or taboos that are associated with the practice of psychoanalysis. The most common one that persists even today, and understandably so, is that one of, touching between a therapist or an analyst and a patient. That one still persists. However, there are a whole lot of other ones that have been revised, eased, or overturned even. For instance, in talking about authenticity, in talking about the blank screen, for instance, those two concepts, for instance, it is no longer deemed a necessary or precondition of analysis for a therapist or an analyst to remain, to be a blank screen for that work to happen. So the COVID-19 has impacted us beyond just the ethical considerations. It has forced us to think quite carefully about the frame, which is why then my presentation today is entitled "From the Reclining Couch to the Screen of a Smart Gadget." And somehow I would like to, in the most basic of ways, to trace that journey of the patient who we encounter initially, the psychoanalytic patient who we encounter initially on Freud's couch, and who now fast forward to 2020 post the COVID moment. If we are post that at all, we now encounter that same patient on the screen of a smart gadget. Can we carry on? To the next slide, please. Thank you. Now, I said to you that analytical work happens within something that is called the psychoanalytical setting. It's a clinical setting. And it comprises of the situation, the ambience, and the process. And I will go into a little bit more detail to, regarding this aspect of the clinical setting, just to give you an idea as to what I'm talking about. However, as you will see later on, my focus will particularly be on the situation. Okay, now let's talk about the situation. And as I said, this is where a bit of focus is going to go into. The situation really relates very simply to the participants and the arrangements. And these arrangements that we're talking about relate to time, the time of the session that the therapist and the patient are going to meet, the place where they are going to meet, and such other arrangements as fees. So clearly, these are the more objective stuff that can be observed by outsiders, by medical aides, by families, by friends, by employers, those kinds of people. So this is the first aspect, and it is quite important. And then we go to the next aspect of the clinical setting, being the psychoanalytic ambience. This really, and this is a very important one because it does depend on how the situation, as just described, has been set up. Right now, this refers to how the psychoanalytic situation is experienced by the participants. So the place, the arrangements, and so on and on, how they are experienced by the participants, and these participants being the therapist or the analyst and the patient. Understandably, this one is more of a subjective intrapsychic process, and it will be different from person to person, from participant to participant. And lastly, we have the psychoanalytic process, which now relates to the psychological changes initiated and maintained by the participants. And I want to emphasize this as well, that this suggestions and these thoughts that I'm sharing emanate particularly from the paradigm of self-psychology. So according to self-psychology, really, what we do is to start off a process that loosely we can call analysis. But that process is a process that is not supposed to end. So if the analysis or the treatment of a given patient has been successful, it means that that patient will then, at the end of the process with the therapist, take over the analysis by themselves. So it becomes self-analysis, and hopefully that goes on for as long as they are alive. So it is an unending process. So, and it is quite important. Once again, it is dependent very much on the situation. So I keep on going to the situation because that's very, very important. The kind of subjective experiences that the participants in this space experience, as well as the process itself, depend very much on what I consider to then be key, being the psychoanalytic situation. Now, as I said, just now to focus on the situation and its implications in the context of online consultations. We would appreciate that if you look at the history of psychoanalytically influenced psychotherapy. Over time, there has been a movement from what I referred to earlier, this patient whom we encounter on Freud's reclining couch. And similarly, the kind of method that is utilized to enable the process, being free association, it changes. It is no longer that necessary. And beyond that, so that patient moves to sitting face to face with the therapist. Now here we can imagine people like Kohut in regard to self-psychology, but also you can also imagine Melanie Klein sitting with a child, in the playroom, which somehow suggests already to you that that movement has happened. We no longer have this patient sitting on a couch and free associating. And now, in 2020, a defining moment happens that we move from just face-to-face to now FaceTime. And it is also important to emphasize that when we say that there is this movement, it does not necessarily mean that there is no longer a practice where there are patients that you encounter on the reclining couch. And similarly, as we move on to FaceTime, there are still, we sort of move between these extremities. Just to emphasize also that FaceTime is the new edition, and hence we need to talk about this. So I hope it has become apparent already at this point that my attitude towards online consultation, towards where we are today being FaceTime, using FaceTime to consult, it's slightly a positive one in a guarded way because this is quite new. Now, accordingly then, here's a patient that I encountered, and I'm going to be quite brief. So this is a patient that I have, called the migrant patient and childhood sexual abuse. And I assume that already when you talk about child sexual abuse, that is likely to raise certain professional sensitivities as to, will this work with a patient who has experienced such a profound, a major negative impact, on his life. Now, obviously he's male, as I said there, the abuse happened during his early childhood. He experienced disrupted caregiving surround and so on and on. Parents were fighting. He became extremely withdrawn and isolated. He grew up with shame. And then he moved on to actually bullying others. A typical picture of sexual abuse. He used a lot of, substances, and he acted out quite a lot. Eventually, he landed in rehabilitation and then in treatment with a psychiatrist and with me. Early days, all he did was to mention that he was sexually abused within the family, and he didn't go beyond that. He seemed to experience what I have called affective regression. So he dropped the secret that, this is what happened to me. And both of us beyond that point, it felt like it was difficult to know what now, because it felt like we had been building towards this releasing of the secret. And now that the secret had happened, what now? In the middle phase of the treatment, and I've sort of put in some blue color there to suggest where the consultation or the treatment moved online. So midway, during the middle phase, the treatment went online. And he got me reading about solitude because his sense was that, firstly, he did not want to talk a lot about the sexual abuse. And secondly, he did not really believe that part of his getting better involves, engaging in good enough relationships to ensure that he experiences those self-object experiences as suggested by self-psychology. So those are the phases, and where we are now, fortunately, we went beyond that, and we were able to get to a point where he's strengthening his self. He is reading and making sense of the abuse, of the sexual abuse, from a vantage point that is not as vulnerable as it might have been when this happened during his early childhood. He's able to talk about the abuser, who is part of the family, and he can only go as far as saying that, she is my sibling. He cannot invite him in more ways within the family fold. And it feels like his own self-analysis has started already, because he says that when he raised this comment, he said something and then he anticipated that as the therapist, this was what I was going to say. And he decided that, okay, I know you're going to say this, let me respond to you already, which feels like he's beginning to take over that function for himself, to be able to analyze what is going on, at that particular moment. So largely, it would feel like, in a very, very modest way, this process has worked out well, in spite of the fact that there was an insertion of online consultation halfway through the process. This is a person that I'm still seeing at the moment, and things seem to be going quite well. Now, the new situation, just to share with you, and this now goes beyond just this, migrant, patient of mine. My thoughts are that the situation has been revised, or is in the process of being revised. There is the extension of the consultation room. We concern ourselves mostly about the situation within the therapist room, but it looks like now that situation has been extended into our patients' homes. So does it challenge us to defocus from the actual consultation room? Perhaps not, but it challenges us to think a little bit more about other aspects. Like Dylan, a number of places have been used by patients while I'm consulting with them, ranging from the car, the kitchen while a person is cooking, lighting up a cigarette again and again, seeing a couple while they are sitting on their bed in the bedroom, a quiet corner in the garden, a golf course. And instinctually, you might want to sort of call them out regarding this, but you slow down a little bit, because we don't know enough about consulting online. And what helps us as well is that some of the prescriptions of psychoanalysis, in fact, are changeable, and they've changed for the betterment of the discipline. Now we also get to see the real spouse as compared to what we talked about in the sessions. We see the real children, the real house. Are these intrusions or extensions of the process?
Hamadi, sorry to intrude.
Okay.
You've got another about 2 minutes, Max.
Okay. And I'm finishing off. Okay. And so there are network issues, and how far is it going to go? What do we say when a patient holds a glass of red wine? And what do we say when they light up a joint? Do we draw a line there? And if we do, why would we be doing that? And in the end, you have to wonder really what happened when the patient stopped facing away from the analyst. When this patient arose from the reclining couch and sat face to face with the analyst, did anything go wrong? Did this have negative implications for the process? What happens now when the patient is no longer in the room, but at their own homes? And I say that with the patient that I've presented to you, we can start having some discussions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kamadi, for a really insightful presentation, and apologies for this being a fairly short time for a really a topic that requires much more in-depth scope. But thanks again, and let's come back to you in the discussion. I'm sure there are going to be more questions and queries on that issue.
Sure, thank you.
We're going to move now to our third speaker, and that's Dr. Kolinda Linda, who is a clinical psychologist in private practice, specializing in cognitive behavior therapy for anxiety disorders, sleep issues, stress, and burnout. She's the founder of the CBT group, also the creator of the CBT site Thoughts First, which reflects her passion for self-help. Kolinda has authored several self-help books and is frequently quoted and interviewed on the media. She has been involved with SADAG as an advisory board member and director, and also former chairperson. At this juncture, I think it's also important for us to just highlight CISA's collaboration over the years with organizations such as SADAG, which are very, very important. And today we're pleased that we actually have two members of the SADAG leadership or past leadership on our panel. So thank you, and Dr. Linda, it's over to you.
Thanks, Prof. And I'm going to ask Fatima to put on the slides because I seem to be having some strange connection issues, which of course would happen. So, you know, it's lovely to see familiar names. I've been looking at the chat, so hi to everybody, friends, colleagues, and to people I don't know. And thank you to CISA for arranging this. So I'm sure all of you have been sitting listening with rapt attention and taking notes. I certainly have been. I'm on 2 pages. And, you know, I think I'm going to be a little bit less formal. So this is the advantage when you're the third speaker. You don't have to cover a lot of the technical things. So thanks, guys, for discussing the frame, for discussing the ethics, and just so many important things. So if we move to the next slide, I think we are in a brave new world. And this is something I just like to start off with, that mental health pre-COVID looked like this. So I qualified in 92, and I remember reading something where the World Health Organization predicted that depression would be the leading cause of disability by 2020. And I thought, what? And that was pre-COVID. So, you know, I think we're definitely dealing with way worse than this at the moment. And to draw your attention to GAD, the second line, 3 to 8% of the population at any given time. And I think, you know, right now it's probably doubled. I don't think you can tell who's really depressed, who's got GAD, who's got OCD, you know, who's got what at the moment. So I think this is just something important to point out. And, you know, as Prof mentioned, I'm on the board of SADAG, and they did a survey in April. So we normally get about 600 calls a day. We've got 16 phone lines, many other, you know, email, etc. And I think it was about 3 weeks ago, I heard that the new numbers are 1,400 calls per day, every day. So that is really something. So this is really what we're dealing with at the moment, and we're at the coalface. So can I have my next slide, please? Okay, so I just want us to look at the context because I think it does change everything. So I was trained at WITS in the 80s, and that was, of course, psychodynamic. And then I moved to RA, which is UJ now, and that was more systemic. And then I did CBT after that. And one of the things that we all know from systemic is that there's this ongoing pattern of equilibrium, chaos, new equilibrium. And I think the problem for us is that there isn't just a new equilibrium. You know, these bombs keep coming. So the chaos is ongoing. And in the same way, we all know the stages of grieving and loss, but they're also ongoing. And I think that's what makes it more difficult. And, you know, we're human as well as the therapists. With that, I do specialize in anxiety. And of course, uncertainty and anxiety are best friends. So we're dealing with our own uncertainties, and we're dealing with everybody's uncertainties. So whether they've got a clinical disorder or not, Certainly everybody's in that boat in terms of this uncertainty. And of course, who do we go to when we're in a tricky, uncertain, grieving, chaotic state? Who's the safe harbor? Who's the anchor? Who's the lighthouse? And that typically is the therapist. And I've actually had people verbalize all three of those to myself, to colleagues, that, okay, I've come back to therapy because, I need something which is safe. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is what happened to me. And I've obviously got a group practice, and so I've been chatting with them and with other colleagues. And so this is pretty much how it went down, and I'm sure it went down in a similar way. So think for yourselves what happened. So there was definitely that shock denial. This cannot be happening. It's not a pandemic. It's happening over there. And we were grasping tightly at normality. It will be fine. It'll be fine. Then when lockdown happened, okay, we don't want to die, and we can wait it out. We can do this. And I heard colleagues say this. I heard psychiatrists say this. I heard my clients say this. Oh, I'll come back in 21 days. So initially, I actually had decent hours for a change, which was quite nice, until I got freaked out by that. But I think we all were in this waiting it out. And then this jolly well thing got extended. And during this waiting out, I'm not sure about everybody else, but I've never done as much press, mostly through SADAG, but, many other reasons. And we had all these hats we were juggling. So we were providing support to our colleagues, to our families, trying for ourselves, definitely to our clients, educating people. I had so many clients asking me, what do you think? Is this thing real? What do you think is going to happen? Do you think it's that dangerous? And what are you doing? And, so there, of course, were the boundary issues, and you had to be very careful with that. And, of course, learning tech while judging or juggling your own stuff. I'm a mom of teens, 17-year-olds in grade 11, which the teachers have made them hysterical about. So there was that too. And what I felt and what I heard from a lot of people was I was working harder, but I was earning less, because you either dropped your rate right down or you did pro bono, because we're all therapists for a reason. And I think the tricky thing that the new normal kept shifting, and it still is. So every time that there's a headline, every time you open the news app, there's a new normal popping up. What if this level changes to this, and so on and so on. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the CBT frame. So I'm going to stick to this because I've been doing CBT pretty exclusively for the last 28 years or so. So just a quick reminder, it very much is the here and now, but obviously, your past brings you here. So the emphasis is more on what is left of the past that's still showing up now. And this is what we're working with, and then we'll move towards where we're going. The symptom is definitely treated before the cause. So you can think of the analogy, if you're doing surgery and the person's hemorrhaging, we do focus on the symptom first, or therapy interfering behaviors first, and then we get to the cause. So we definitely do get there, but it's that way down. And the therapeutic relationship is a collaborative one. So I say collaborative empiricism, obviously the empirical base, and collaborative. So it does help that you can be a little bit more relaxed and informal. But then again, there sits the danger. As both of our speakers have mentioned already, you've got to be very, very aware that the boundaries have all shifted. And of course, it's brief and skill-based. So you constantly, as a therapist, are shifting set. It's not kind of, I have a few longer-term clients, and sometimes it's just a relief. Oh, good. It's someone I know. I can just relax. From a CBT perspective, it's not that sort of constant shifting of set with the tech and all the rest of it. Okay, next slide, please. So the online CBT frame, what was the same and what was not the same? Well, as I said, there is the informality and there's the collaborative frame. And what helps about that is you can joke a bit, the frame is much looser. So there is that. But what's tricky is that you're kind of massaging, the relationship when you meet somebody. And I think that's for all therapy. There's two complete strangers. Now, where do you begin? How do you begin? Now, you can't just let this thing happen organically. You have to add something to your patter. And you've got to choose, well, how do I bring in, are you alone? Is this a good space? And the consent, at least you can send them beforehand, so that's okay. But, you know, the tech, all these guidelines that need to happen. So I just make it very informal at the beginning, and I say, okay, so this is how CBT works, and just check who referred you and what is it that you want out of the process. But also, let's go through a couple of these points. Let's do a bit of housekeeping. And once that's out of the way, it's out of the way. What has been tricky has been creating props, because normally somebody's sitting right there, I do a drawing on a piece of paper, and I'm holding it up, and, you know, it does weird things as you hold it closer to the screen. And so I've resorted to, at times, just emailing them something in the session. So I've created certain files. Okay, here's a document, have a good look at this. God forbid that you do the WhatsApp, because yes, then there's that very tricky boundary. People start commenting on your photograph, on your status, and all of that. So you've got to be hyper careful. I've also learned how to share tech in new ways, sometimes sharing my screen, just being very aware before I start for the day that there's nothing else on the screen that you wouldn't want anyone to see. But what I have noticed, what's been fascinating, has been, my experience certainly has been that defenses seem to disappear when you're on a screen. People, you know, they almost forget that there's a real human on the other end who's a therapist. And sometimes you see all sorts of things that they wouldn't normally have done, maybe. You sometimes have mirrors in the background reflecting things. So defenses do seem to drop, and maybe that's part of the CBT frame, because people are perhaps more chatty, you're more chatty, so the defenses tend to drop anyway, in my experience. And of course, as both of my colleagues have said, you do definitely get a glimpse into real life and habits and people's contexts. It gives you, you know, quite an interesting glimpse into, you know, the starkness or the richness of certain contexts, and where are they, and where do they choose to sit. And if you just sit quietly, they'll definitely talk to you about it. And one upside is that exposures within the home are more real. So, you know, if there is an object they don't want to touch, but it's right there in the home, you can certainly do a lot more in terms of exposures. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, this is where the challenge comes. So the definition of private seems to be quite subjective. So I'm thinking of one relatively awkward situation where somebody was sitting in her dressing room, and this is a medical colleague, and her husband was leopard crawling at the back in his underpants, which was really more of him than I wanted to see. I didn't want to see him at all. And, you know, we'd been through the whole privacy discussion. And she just carried on talking, and I knew she must be able to see him on the screen. In the back, he was putting on his T-shirt and putting on jeans. I was thinking, to say or not to say, and if so, what and how. Fortunately, he then disappeared, so we left it at that. And about 10 minutes before the end, he started leopard crawling back and forth, and she said, "Oh, excuse my husband in the background. We're wanting to pack because we're going away straight after this." And, you know, so fortunately she'd mentioned it while I was formulating what to say about it. And sometimes clients will help you out. But it is very tricky to say or not to say. So these sideshows in the background are tricky. And one of my other clients, you know, I've had this a few times, where you assume their pet's around and shh, shh. Turns out, and eventually I just said, you know, I just need to check what's happening. And I was fairly informal. And she said, "Oh, it's my pets. They keep making a noise and I'm struggling to hear." And she then proceeded to introduce me to her rats. And she was in her bathrobe, and then the rats were in the bathrobe. So that was a bit challenging. So fortunately, she, after a few minutes, put them away again. But, you know, in other contexts, that is when the therapist at times needs to speak up. When do you just let it go and you try not to be judgy? And when are you thinking, do not look at the rat? And when are you thinking, you know, when do you sometimes use that therapeutic frame, the CBT informality, to be able to say, you know, I'm really feeling quite distracted by those rats. Would you mind if you put your fur babies away? So, you know, I think one has to go with your gut. And this is sometimes where being more cognitively flexible and being more familiar or more experienced certainly helps. I think we've all been through the pets, the children, all of that. And now, on the exposures, I did say in the home it's easier, but you can't support the person quite the same way, because that physicality of your presence definitely counts for something, and you can't enforce it. You know, in the same way as you're in your office, okay, I'm sure you can touch this, let's do this, or say with social anxiety, let's get up, let's do this speech. So that is a little bit tricky. The tech connectivity, we're not even going to go there. Dylan, I share your feeling around sometimes you just want to bang your head or the device, but you can't, because as you say, you never know if the client can still see you. And yeah, screen fatigue, I'm not even going to go into that. But having said that, there is an upside, which I found when I went back to work 2 days a week and then 3 days online, which is because we're in a group practice, so we couldn't all be there and have a very packed place. And I'd forgotten how challenging some of my more personality disordered clients were, or my extremely flamboyant, dramatic ones, and felt my hair blowing back because it was so much easier to contain them on a screen. So that's just something to keep in mind. Okay, next slide, please. So, of course, access. You know, I think this has definitely been mentioned. I think what's very tricky has been my own space, because obviously confidentiality, you know, it's incredibly important as the therapist that what you're saying to this person remains confidential. And I don't have a set space in my home where sound-wise it's confidential, besides my bedroom. So I'm going to mention here transitions, which I tell my clients too. So I have a desk which is normally filled with ornaments. So in the morning, I move the ornaments, I move the desk to slightly over to a bit of a dead space where I'm not looking at my bedroom as such, I'm looking outside, and I have my props around me. And it's very important because you might slip up and say where you are or comment about your bed. That's the last thing you want. I'm sure my psychoanalytic colleagues will be having a chuckle about that. But certainly it's very tricky, isn't it, you know, in terms of confidentiality, because you want to be absolutely focused and in the zone, because this is incredibly important in terms of you bringing your A game. And of course, there have been learning curves, yes. And then just 2 points, you know, clients who maybe hadn't thought about online, who have said, I'm sick of wrestling through the traffic, I'm loving this, I want to stay online forever. And then certainly the remote locations. And I've got 1 or 2 clients in Europe who've said, I specifically wanted to see somebody who I had no chance of bumping into, because I feel really awkward that you kind of seen all my issues. And of course, those are the Enneagram 3s. So that was quite interesting. Okay, so next slide, please. Don't know if that's got a bit stuck. Okay, I'm sure it will get there in a few minutes. And it's actually an important slide, so if you could just move it to that, that would be great. And this slide is, yes, thank you. This is about unique therapist factors. So I think your age and stage are quite important. Career stage, if you're more established, there were a lot of my colleagues who just started, and that was really challenging. You know, you're just building up a practice, and you're now almost, you know, you're stuck because you can't do the online, or maybe from a CBT perspective, you do skills, so it's a lot easier to do that online. Your historical relationship, are you used to tech or are you not? Your locations, interruptions, I've mentioned. Now, what I noticed was that there were some colleagues who were quite negative when I chose not to come back face to face as soon as perhaps some of them did. A couple of psychiatrists who said to some clients that, oh, she's not back yet, you know, online isn't real therapy. Needless to say, I did call up the relevant people and have a conversation. But certainly some people who were saying, well, online isn't real, so I'm not going to refer while you do online, you know, so there were definitely some challenges there. Self-care does tend to be lower on the list, so we've got to think about that as well. We're telling our clients that we're not doing it. The survivor
Sorry,
guilt.
Colinda,
Yeah.
sorry to interrupt. Can we give you another minute or two to round up?
I'm almost done.
Okay.
So the survivor guilt of, you know, when you're working and colleagues of yours aren't, and you're really exhausted because you're doing much more, but they're not. And then, of course, the risk-earning relationship. A lot of colleagues who were kind of bullied into going back when they didn't really feel comfortable. You know, maybe they were high risk, maybe they had high-risk people at home, but they needed to earn. And, you know, so that's come up in supervision a few times. And then the legislation, the fees, the medical aids, deciding an hour online is not the same as a regular hour. So definitely SAISA and SADAG helped us there. And then 2 more slides. The next one's around fatigue. I think we've had Zoom fatigue, COVID fatigue, decision fatigue, compassion fatigue. We know about these. And then just the last one, just to keep in mind that for our clients as well as for ourselves, I know everybody's been talking about we're in the same boat, but if you could just move to the next slide, I pretty much think we're in the same storm, but we're in different boats. And so it's not just we're better equipped than our clients to be handling a lot of these things. Yes, we are, but we're still people. We're still working from home and juggling. So I just really want to underline self-care. Thanks. I'm going to end there.
Thank you, Kalinda, again for a really comprehensive presentation, particularly looking at the CBT perspective. And I think that gives us a nice contrast in some ways, and also some similarities came up, I think, with Marty's presentation. So again, I'm sure we're going to be tackling some interesting issues there as we get into the discussion after Zamo's presentation. So we move now to the fourth presentation, and that's by Zamo Mbele, who is a clinical psychologist currently practicing as a senior psychotherapist and supervising psychologist at Tara Hospital and also at the Wits Donald Gordon Medical Center. Zamo is the vice chairperson of the South African Depression and Anxiety Group, SADAG. And again, as we mentioned, we are pleased that SADAG's been supporting us in this respect. And he's also a director at the Ububele Education Trust. So Zama, thank you for joining us, and I'm going to hand over now to you.
Thank you so much. And I hope everybody can hear me. I hope I'm audible. I'm going to jump right into it and get going and get started. One of the advantages of being able to speak online and speaking with so many very close colleagues is that you can take advantage of their stellar presentations before and yourself be a lot more short and a lot more concise, because I really think that my previous colleagues have covered most, if not all, of the points that are necessary. And I've been following very closely the chat site here, and I'm really much more curious to get into the question and answer and discussion session. It's also very good to see very many colleagues and close friends and people that we've trained with and that I have trained. And I think that as a result, I also take this moment to thank SAISA and the leadership of SAISA for organizing this incredibly important conversation. So again, I want to say that, I'm in a really privileged position of being able to gloss over some of my prepared thoughts because I think that people have really covered it incredibly well. I do want to highlight one or two things. The first one is to agree with something that Hamadi said, which is the fact that we must always appreciate that this is still called the novel coronavirus. And one of the reasons we need to appreciate that is there are two reasons. The first one is to appreciate how little we know. And Colinda's right, we were asked to speak a lot and we get continued to be asked to do a lot of speaking. And I think that from our side, and I'd like to encourage you, my colleagues, is to really appreciate that while we do know a lot, and there's a wealth of information and training, experience and expertise that you do come with, there's also real space to appreciate how little we know, in fact. And I think there's a great degree of liberty that you can grant yourself, and patience and understanding that, in fact, the appreciation of how little we know can really take a lot of burden off you, and you do not have to be the pseudo expert in the room and abandon the fact that you are also just a human being who is vulnerable to this particular pandemic and virus. And a little bit later, when I elaborate on some of the experiences of practitioners, I'll speak about that so much. I think there's also something so incredibly reassuring for the person on the other side to hear that, and both of that is in terms of patients and clients, as well as supervisees and people in the audience. Now, I must say that I'm speaking from 3 positions, and I will elaborate just now. And in the past 6 to 8 months, I've done a lot of research and I've done a lot of collaboration. And in fact, we have immersed ourselves in trying to know so much. And on the one hand, I do want to claim that I do know a lot on this topic. However, I do also absolutely want to join you in the fact that I am still learning. And when Colinda started speaking, she claimed that she had 2 pages worth of notes that she was taking. And I think that I've matched that and doubled it since her talk as well. We are all still learning. The last point is that, of course, the appreciation of the novelty of this really does allow you to arm yourself with as much information as possible. And because there have been so many opportunities that have come from this particular pandemic that we must appreciate so that we can have hope and keep going, one of them have been the many learning platforms that I've been able to access, both as a teacher or educator or trainer or facilitator, but also as a member of the audience, that ordinarily on a Tuesday evening at 6:30, for example, I may not have been able to make it to those beautiful offices in Parktown to be able to attend this. And I think that we need to grab that with both arms and additional limbs where possible and immerse ourselves with the amount of learning that we can do during this time. And lastly, on the point of learning and the novelty of this, it's not just an academic learning, it's not just a professional learning, but it's also about the learning, as Hamadi was talking about, of the ordinary nature of this disruption and this crisis, and what it can do in the allowance of us to access our own primitive anxieties and where we can find that and assist with clients and patients, as well as the ability to learn that disruption can bring with it a lot of newness, and in fact also a lot of newness that we can harness for the future as well. So that has been my first point, is the appreciation of the novelty. My second point, which I probably should have started with, is to say a lot of what I frame my discussion today is an accumulation of the work that I do at Tara Hospital, and having worked at Tara Hospital for almost a decade now, working mostly with inpatients and outpatients. I'll refer specifically, for example, to the fact that actually, while a lot of tele-medicine and tele-psychiatry and tele-psychology has been new in the last 8 months or so, actually, we have been using a lot of telecontact and telecounseling as an adjunct feature to treatment. And I'll speak to that in a second. It also allows me, for example, to elaborate on something Dylan was speaking about, which is the assessment that you need to make with your patients. The second point is the work that we do at SADC, and Colinda is completely right. I mean, our recent stats were at 1,400 a day, and 1,400 calls, which was a while back, is a lot. However, that number keeps rising, and we are soon to hit 2,000 phone calls a day. And that does not consider, for example, the WhatsApps that we get and the emails that we also have to follow up on. And it also doesn't consider the fact that, in fact, because of our appreciation that the second wave is not just in the second spike of infections of the coronavirus, but it's also the wave of anxieties, depressions, PTSDs, etc., that people will be suffering from, we're still actually at very tame numbers. And the last kind of place that I harness a lot of my information from is working with a consortium of colleagues, psychiatrists, psychologists, social workers, and professional nurses in our response to trying and assisting our frontline healthcare workers. And we've done, I think, incredible work in setting up a national response to trying to create support in groups, online, telephonically, for individuals, and etc., for all of our frontline healthcare workers. And I would encourage you all to go and access it. And I'll put that information on the chat, because it also includes a lot of resources. So bear with me. I've taken up quite a bit of time in that regard, though hopefully I've already elaborated on some of my points. I want to make 3 very quick ones. I want to follow up on what Dylan was saying, which is the importance of assessing the patient's appropriateness to doing this type of work. Not everybody can do this work, and a really diligent assessment can come up with a few options. A, you can do some form of this work which might be just telephonic check-ins, which is better than actually trying to mimic or imitate an online session. Or B, in fact, you can do an online session, full 40 to 50-minute sessions, and that's what you do. Or C, something of a hybrid and or to be increasingly more creative. So to speak quite free-handedly here, for example, the work that we are doing at Tara has always been that we do offer, to some extent, telephonic check-ins for certain patients. However, we do appreciate that in addition to the homicidal patient and the suicidal patient that Dylan was referring to, you must also be careful in the assessment of the psychotic structure and functioning of certain patients, where to have a voice emanating from a device can elicit a lot more of the paranoia and persecution. And it's very difficult for you, for example, to be present and to contain a person if that is the case. We obviously work with severe personality disorders as well. And I saw a colleague of mine, Lavendra Pillay, who also worked in the personalities ward. And there too, you must make the appropriate assessment, because an acute personality disorder who struggles oftentimes from dysregulation will find it incredibly difficult to be able to access deep affect without having a psychotherapist sitting there with them in the room in order to catch that, help them and assist with it as well. And therein, both with your psychotic and your personality disorders, you have to consider then even the distinctions between, are you doing pure telephonic, also as an audio, or are you doing virtual screen as well, and so on and so forth. And then the last one, which is of special interest to me, having worked very closely with the Ububele Education Trust, is also working with children and adolescents. And there are very many things that I can say about this. The one of them is that oftentimes when we discuss privacy, we think about adults. Now, we must appreciate that adults are a lot more able to secure their own space than adolescents and children. And we must pay careful sensitivity to this in a bid to try and make things a lot more bearable for them. And again, to invoke something that my colleague Linda was speaking about, is that of course we also know that in a system which is a lot of the primary pathway of intervention for adolescents and children, you're asking a child to sit in that what is oftentimes making them ill or contributing to their difficulties and discuss it, speak about it, and open up about it. That too can be incredibly destructive. So the assessment of the patient is incredibly important. You have so many options, and I'll jump to one of the points that I was going to make later, that you can tell that I'm speeding up, and to say accessing and seeking appropriate supervision in this regard is incredibly important. Now, this supervision is not just in the sense of the supervision of the clinical content of what you'll be dealing with. That is very important. But also accessing an experienced supervisor who can really assist you in the formulation of what it is that you're working with, to assist you formulating, though I do think my colleague Hamadi has really touched on that enough. The one thing that I wanted to say is that oftentimes the idea of the frame, it can be very easy to antagonize, because we imagine that it is something prescribed by some dead European ancestors somewhere. And in reality, from what I heard, what Hamadi was speaking about, and very certainly how I really want to foster an understanding of the frame, it is a way of working so that we can know when we are no longer working or there's a disruption to the way that we're working. Now, to begin there is to say that, of course, all of our frames have been disrupted. Some of us have had to immigrate online completely, which is to move there without the idea for now of moving back in order to work within safeties and the parameters that are upon us. And some of us, and I should hope most of us, will be working with migration, which might be seasonal and might be the case for a long while in order to preserve the psychotherapy, however, has the option for a return to something of a normality. And I think that that distinction is incredibly important to make to you, my audience, but also in the encouragement for you to be able to take that further, especially in the setting of the frame, is to know that is this, of course, we're in a fluid situation, and is this setup fluid as well, or are we going to be working here for forever? The last thing that the last two things perhaps that I wanted comment on are, as I've said, the importance of online supervisions and teachings. And I think that it is also incredibly important to maintain the professionalism that Dylan was speaking about, but also to be sensitive, and this point I want to make quite emphatically, to the fact that there's a risk of a disavowal of spaces. We are now no longer working in professional work environments which have their own securities, right? And oftentimes, most of us are being asked to work from home. Now, there's the importance of really maintaining a professionalism, though I want to propose quite emphatically that there's also the importance of a dual recognition that most people are, in fact, working from home. And when you work from home at the best of times, you run the risk of undoing home, of erasing home, getting rid of it, and denying the fact that that's the space that you're in, especially if you have a limitation of securing a room or a section of the house. And the risk there is that we ask people to disavow something that we in fact know is incredibly important for them. For example, it is unavoidable that there may be children. And I think that there's a fair balance between being incredibly important and at the same time not creating mad-making scenarios of saying, why is that child there? In reality, vision of experiences that came from psychoanalytic groups that were run mostly with psychoanalysts and candidate analysts. And I want to reference two colleagues, Guru Fordo as well as Yael Kadish, who were involved in this. However, they've published that these were the following common experiences that people shared. And I thought it might be interesting to both reiterate, because you'll hear a lot of people have spoken about this, but also maybe to put into words what a lot of people will be experiencing. A lot of people struggled, for example, with the economics and the economic implications of this, including the terrors, not quite knowing how the situation was going to go, fluctuating both between a sense of insecurity, a loss of income, as well as a degree of some positivity and a feeling as though in fact, there is a lot of work. Some people struggled with the greater degree of transparency that came with this. And many people said, as Kalinda was saying, that there's a greater sense of exhaustion, and there's really nice literature which has to come out trying to explore and examine this. So what I also thought was really interesting is that there was also a great degree of suddenness, that all of this was upon us and upon us so incredibly quickly. And this suddenness can in itself be traumatic, not just for the person that you're working with, though for the personal lives of the people doing the work too. There's a high level of loss, and I think that the loss and the grief that comes with the shifts that we make are incredibly important to log in to know, so that we can also appreciate the opportunities and the new ways of working that can come there. And I just want to read that it felt as though something rich and intimate was lost for certain people. Some people discussed that they had to mourn the loss of not working in one's usual familiar space with familiar smells, sights, and sounds, and feeling even more distracted than in the new way of working in potential. There was also, in many ways, the loss of two people in the room, two energies where you can sit, even if not in sight, with another person, which is such an instinctual human activity. And very briefly, my last two was how the work was incredibly different. And a lot of people have felt that they have to behave differently when working online. For example, some people will resonate with the idea that there's always this either push to kind of interrupt and to intimate something in order to let the other person know that you're still present, or an interruption by the other person, by your patients or clients, which is very different. And of course, the last one, which I think is incredibly important to always log, is the fact that this did bring up a great deal of primitive anxieties for us all, because this was a leveler, and it was no longer just something that was out there that was going to be difficult and threatening for patients and clients, but also very certainly and very definitely for us as psychotherapists, as counselors as well. And that has been a huge adaptation and something to confront and to consolidate into who we are. So I want to stop there. I'm a minute over what I thought I would be, and I've rattled a lot, though I want to leave enough time for us to have a conversation. So I will pause at this point.
Thank you, Zamo. Your timing was actually very good, so thank you for that. I like the last bit that you mentioned about the primitive anxieties and how they play out, and I think this is a reality that that perhaps a lot of us have not considered as we got into this space, or as we try to get into this space. But yes, let's now get into the discussion, and I think our timing has been really good. So I want to take this opportunity to thank all of the presenters for really adhering well to the time. It gives us the kind of time that we wanted to engage in a bit of discussion. So hopefully we're going to be able to get all the panelists back with us, audio and video. Is that correct?
Hello.
Hi. Lovely. Great. Thank you so much, and thanks again. This has been, I've certainly found this really very, very helpful, very informative, and looking at the chats, there's been wonderful feedback. Really, people have found this, found your insights and your suggestions and your recommendations really, really good. There've been lots and lots of questions and comments, as I think you may have followed. What I've tried to do is just narrow them down, because a number of them have actually been in a similar area, and I've tried the best I can just to kind of group them, that perhaps each of you may be able to comment on. There are quite a few relating to ethics and legal issues that Dylan might want to comment on. So Dylan, let me just give you a few of these, and you can rattle off on those. One of the common ones that come up is, what are the most secure platforms to use? Another one has been about the Protection of Personal Information Act. Others may be able to respond there as well. But if you can just respond to those two in the meantime, perhaps this could get us started.
Okay, sure, Anthony, thanks. In terms of the most secure platforms, it's those platforms which are end-to-end encrypted. So meaning that the data leaves the device and is encrypted, and at no point in its journey through the internet and the different servers and to the user's device is it ever decrypted. Okay. The ones that are end-to-end encrypted are, I mean, interestingly, WhatsApp is a very secure platform. So WhatsApp is end-to-end encrypted. The only difficulty I find with WhatsApp is that it introduces a whole lot of boundary issues in terms of patients kind of being able to see your status. They suddenly want to use WhatsApp with you. So you just need to consider that. But it's a very secure platform, and I do use it. FaceTime is end-to-end encrypted, and so it can be used. The only problem with FaceTime is that the other person, it only works with iOS or Mac devices. Signal is another one that's very, very secure. The tricky thing with that is that the user has to open a specific account and log on to that account. So sometimes you have to kind of coach somebody through using a new service. And then recently, Zoom has just enabled end-to-end encryption. And Zoom has been my go-to for a number of reasons. It's usability. I find that you can just send somebody a link, and they just click on the link and they're able to connect without having to sign up to anything. You do now have to enable end-to-end encryption, so just Google that. But yeah, Zoom is end-to-end encrypted right now. So those would be my suggestions. But obviously you need to check with your malpractice insurance, because some of them have only very specific platforms that they will cover. Okay. You've disappeared, but let me just chat about Poppy. I suppose, the main issue with Poppy is that question of you need to make sure that your client's private information is kept protected and private. So whatever platform you are going to be using, you need to ask yourself the question, what are they going to do with your client's data? And so that's to check privacy policies. And that's where, for instance, I like Zoom because somebody can click on it. They never have to give Zoom their email address or anything. And so in some ways, they use the service without any private information being stored by a third party. Yeah, those would be my answers to that.
Okay, thanks, Dylan. There are a few other questions. Maybe we'll come back to you again if there's some time. There's something to perhaps go to Zamo quickly on, and I must say I was quite intrigued listening to you, Zamo, and Kolinda about the numbers. I think you mentioned something like 1,400 per day at SADAG, and this shows us the great need at the moment. Zamo, an issue came up about digital divide and relating to socioeconomics. How we can actually tackle this? Because a lot of what we talked about today is accessible mainly to those who are more affluent, who have access to data, to the technology, etc. Any thoughts about that?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that it's so complicated because there's no one answer in this regard. So I want to answer it in two ways. The way where there's an apparent disadvantage is that most people will struggle to have the Zooms, the subscriptions to the Zooms, enough data to use it, and so on and so forth. So it can in fact really perpetuate the inaccessibility of psychological and psychiatric and just general healthcare services in South Africa, and we know how bad that is in many ways. However, I want to send out some encouragement here, and I want to do it in three ways. The first one is that SADC has been operating online, so to speak, mostly telephonically for many years. And I think that that is a huge achievement, though that should be huge encouragement to say that it is not so much that there isn't capacity and capability out there. It's how we access it in a huge way. I think that I'm referring to statistics more than a decade ago that refer to the fact that in Africa, there are more telephonic devices than there are mattresses. And I think that that number must have really kind of jumped up. And we need to find a way, therefore, in order to harness what does exist, what people do use to be able to access each other, which is there. I think that the kind of vast nature and the broad geographic setup of a country like South Africa and SADC as a reason, as in the southern region, says to us that we have needed to appreciate this from a long time ago. And I'm glad to be part of an institution that has been trying to work there. My second point, which is near anecdotal, is the work, for example, that we can do at the Ububele Trust. Now, Ububele does a lot of work with children, with mothers and children. And let me just say two quick things, is that we have been able, in fact, to reach even more people in the community that we service, which is mostly in Alexandra, which has a high dense population through cell phones. We've needed to respond, of course, at the best of times by capacitating those individuals, mostly by offering data. Though actually, once you get creative and you look into hybrid models, you can send out recordings, you can send out voice notes, and you can kind of have therapeutic interventions, which may be atypical, though are incredibly effective. And we will continue in this way into the future, of course, with the adjunct nature of face-to-face where necessary. And my last point is case in point here, is the ability actually to allow people to access information which can be recorded and broadcasted, or actually also can be recorded remotely, where people may struggle to do so. So my last 2 points there have actually been trying to say, well, of course there are many limitations. I do not think that that should stop us from really trying to continue with a creative model of harnessing what is out there and actually encouraging the use of tele and online contact in order to access a number of people that we need to. Sorry, Prof, you're currently muted. Sure.
I'm sorry. So hopefully you can hear me now. And thanks, Amo, for that. I'm thinking of a comment I heard from Garth Stevens, our CISA president, who's we're going to hear from in a few minutes as well. He made a really interesting point in a meeting I had with him a few days ago. I mean, should we, for example, as CISA, be negotiating with government to put pressure on data service providers? I mean, we've always been complaining in our country about the data service, the data prices. Is there a need perhaps for government to look at lobbying for zero rating consultation services, not just for psychology and mental health, but general healthcare as well? Any thoughts on that very quickly?
Absolutely, and very quickly, and I'll invite my colleague Colinda to also comment on this, is to say that we have a history of trying to lobby the big three and now kind of the big four in trying to support us with zero rating or even some sort of contribution and or donation, because we know that it is essential. So we should absolutely be moving in that direction. There's a conversation around private and public partnership, and I think it needs to go to the next level. And this is not undone. And two brief examples is that if you look at, for example, the telephone line that, and I think I'm allowed to say this, Discovery sponsors for the medical students at VETS, which is a brilliant telephone line. It gets used by more than the medical students. So the need is absolutely there for zero-rated calls and support. And also, if you look at the fact that most universities were able to very quickly and very effectively respond to this by zero-rating certain websites, I think that there is only malice in not being able to respond to the psychological needs of this country in a similar way.
I think I'd just like to add that.
Thanks, Amo. Yes, go ahead.
That absolutely I agree, Amo. And out of the entire health budget, we've seen this in the press, only 5% has been allocated for mental health. So, I think there definitely needs to be some second order shift there in terms of, where is mental health? It's actually critical. Anyway, that could be another whole webinar.
Yeah, absolutely. But certainly, I think an indication for us as organized groups to be talking more to government and getting them more involved. Colinda, while you're on there, a question that perhaps you may want to respond to. Somebody raised the issue of defenses dropping. I'm not sure if that came from your presentation or somebody else's, but I think perhaps you might be able to comment on, and I think Hamadi may be able to comment on that in a little while. Do you find that this is happening in your approach in CBT, or do you think this situation prevails in other therapeutic modalities as well, where patients are a little more easy to be freer and less defensive?
I think certainly, whether it's a CBT thing or not, I'll comment on in a moment, but I think it's an online thing. That you're sitting online, there's a screen, there's that step removed, you can see, you can feel to an extent, but it's not the same as being in the room, not at all. So people are often much more real, that they're a little bit less well-behaved, shall we say, and a little bit less proper, but that's often where you can see much more, that they certainly expose much more about who they really are. That's certainly been my experience. And then from a CBT perspective, people come in and they either know what it is or they feel, well, it's only skills, so they're not too worried. They don't have to delve into the past. Of course, they end up going there anyway. But I think it's often the person's perception. But, if we're referring specifically to the online, absolutely. People do all sorts of things when they're looking at a screen that they wouldn't do if they were sitting physically in the room with you, from what they're wearing, as Dylan was saying, and the clients, often they're in their bathrobes, in their bed, at 12 o'clock, working moms, those kind of people, with rats or without. And I think, yes, people are much more relaxed and kind of less defended in the online space.
So the feeling of threat is far less when there isn't another live being in the room.
Yeah, very much so. And it goes both ways. What I was saying earlier about the therapist, you're perhaps less kind of overwhelmed sometimes by, certain kinds of clients and issues, and that just sort of fill a space. So, yeah, I think that is, it kind of benefits both ways. Hamadi, maybe you want to comment from the psychoanalytic perspective.
Yes, indeed. Thank you. Look, I mean, in terms of defenses, perhaps it's defenses of a different type that one encounters when you do online consulting. Zamor referred to something that is lost when we no longer have these two people being in the room together, and therefore the loss of the reality of those two people, the absence of the intersubjective space that happens, takes away something regarding the kind of defenses that we normally see and interpret and deal with. But it is defenses of a different type that you encounter when you are consulting online. Defenses that I think, in my experience, it has felt like they've been a little bit much more helpful. If you think of Gontrip's, schizoid compromise, that concept, for instance, of someone who very much wants some kind of contact, but that contact not be direct, and that becomes facilitative of the process. So there's some of that kind of presentation that you encounter when you are dealing with the online consultations, and it is facilitative, some of it, and obviously part of the theme today is that we are still learning some of these things. Some of it is quite facilitative. There are other aspects of it that might be a little bit difficult, because then you don't have the intersubjective space to be able to treat this from.
Thank you, Hamadi. Sorry, are you through there? Because our connections seem to be a little bit unstable at the moment. But can I put something else to you that came up, which I think requires a little bit more of an interpretive paradigm? So you may be best suited to answer this. Somebody asked the question about whether you think clients may be conveying some meaning by their choice of locations and backgrounds and what's going on in their environment. Any thoughts on that?
Look, I always say that psychoanalytically, everything means something. So we don't really have something that is a coincidence. However, the extent to which it talks to the process at hand at that point, that might not be certain. It is something that might emerge later on, in the process. But yes, it does.
Well, one is frozen and one is left. So I think maybe I'll just come in from my side and say, certainly I agree. I think everything has a meaning. And I think the tricky bit here is that there's also a context. So, if somebody's, say, looking like this quite a lot, is it because they're uncomfortable, or is it because they're in a glass office you can't see and people are walking past? So I think from the online perspective, we've got to be very aware of context as well. Is this the only space they have, or how much choice was there, or could they have gone to their car? And I think all of that, as therapists, whatever the modality, we're all drinking in information all the time. And at the end of the day, it's, for the benefit of the client.
Thanks, Colinda. Another question here that perhaps any of you could step into to respond to is that about reading non-verbals and body language. I mean, are you finding that this is substantially impaired in some way, or are you finding otherwise?
I think it is impaired.
Anyway,
please go ahead, Colinda. I'll speak after you.
Sure. Well, I think we'd all agree, that you can only really see this part of the person, and they can't see us, we can't see them. So, yes, I think it is tricky, but this is also where I think a lot of it is intuitive. You get a sense of where the person's at, even if they're not in the room. But yeah, I think so. You can only really see a short section of the person. But having said that, some people lounge back and some people are still very formal. So I think you see different body language than you would have done. But, I think Samuel, Madi, Dylan, what do you think?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that the idea of loss is not altogether bad, because either way there is something lost, and we will have to contend with what is lost, because there's also obviously then something else gained. So one of the things that the research is showing is that the loss in being able to sit there with somebody means that you're working so much harder to try and pick up so there's a lot more that your eyes are doing, that your attentive mechanics are doing to try and do that in a way. However, I want to refer to something that Hamadi was also speaking about, is that we must remember that in psychoanalysis, one of the principles is really just to listen carefully. So that can also absolutely be gained in migrating to this way of working, to be a lot more attentive and not distracted by very many other things going on, and just to allow your mind to listen to the voice.
Dylan, Kamadi, you want to comment on that?
I agree. There is a little bit lost in the nonverbals, and I've found you have to work incredibly hard just tracking the little data you have. But on the other hand, I've been surprised by how kind of deep and relational the therapy has been. I initially expected it to maybe be on a little bit of a superficial level, but I mean, some clients have been able to, we've been able to do some very deep work, surprisingly deep work through the medium. So it's definitely workable and doable.
I definitely agree with that. I think that when you see somebody in their room, I'm thinking of a lot of my clients in their young, early 20s, students, and, if you look at it more systemically as well, they're in their room and it's their space, and you get quite an interesting impression. But also when they're in their homes, they tend to speak much more about the family dynamics, which is quite interesting because it's very real. A fight happened just before they came in, and now there's a therapy dog on their lap. And that's been, yes, I think all of you have said that, it's just that little bit of normality. And sometimes it's my therapy dog that leaps on my lap, and sometimes that's exactly what you need to break the ice. And, it's just interesting. I almost want to say, in the bigger scheme of things, sometimes you just trust the process. And, the dog has been sleeping for 4 hours, suddenly leaps on your lap, and you have this breakthrough with somebody that you didn't think you would have. So, I think we all know what I'm talking about, the people listening as well.
Okay. I see our time is moving along, and can I just throw in a last somewhat curved ball here? There has been some talk, but in the literature as well, about this process changing or moving traditional psychotherapeutic approaches. Now, of course, we know it does, but I think the issue that seems to be raised is about the move from the very traditionalist, the very purist, and in this sense, maybe more relating to psychoanalytically informed psychotherapies, and that there's an undisciplining of the the way in which psychotherapy is being practiced. What are your thoughts about this? But before that, I think many of us have critiqued the need to change from very traditional approaches, given our context, given our socio-political systems, our economic systems, and the constraints that we have to work in. But what do you think about that? Do you think psychology or rather psychotherapy is becoming undisciplined in some way? Anyone? Maybe Khamadi, you want to give it a shot here? Or anyone else?
Audio's off.
I think he's speaking, but the audio's off.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, there we go.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
All right.
Kamadia?
So, yes, I was saying that, look, there is a bit of undisciplining, but it is not something that is completely new, particularly from psychoanalysis. I think, for instance, the Kleinian, movement from the pure Freudian psychoanalysis at that time have been seen as some kind of undisciplining. But, as we now know in hindsight, it was for the betterment of the discipline. And similarly, I do believe that, what we're busy with now, it is a process where we need to adjust to the demands of the time. And be able to, it doesn't take away the actual practice. It is the way in which we do it, I suppose, that is getting affected. So the undisciplining, much as it might evoke anxiety, as it should, but I think that given the history of the undisciplining, there's no indication at this point that we are in trouble.
I think I would add to that by saying at the end of the day, it's always a therapeutic relationship. So the context where it's happening has changed, maybe, where you're sitting, etc. But at the end of the day, it's a lot about that relationship. And I think one of you, could have been Zamo, who mentioned the space, or somebody did, where we do the work. And I think often, I sometimes go to my office, even if I'm just there in my office doing online. And clients have... almost all of them have said, oh, you're back in your office, normality. And that's been quite interesting, that they're just looking for some sort of normality. And then there's one other location, which is where I am now. And these are the two backdrops, and they never see any others. And, I think we are holding space for them, and we are collaborating with them in some shape or form. And, at the end of the day, it's what is comfortable for the client and what do they need.
I agree. I've had these similar experiences with clients. Kind of, if I'm go back to the office and do an online session there, it's like they comment about that. Oh, you're back there. Yeah. But I think for me, the issue is this is not really an undisciplining. This is just a new communication medium, and we can still do any of the a lot of the interventions we normally do, and manage the boundaries carefully, and continue our work just in a different communication medium. That's my sense.
Absolutely. I mean, all I want to do is echo everything that has been said. Firstly, the work of psychology, particularly psychoanalysis, is about undisciplining and in order to find progress. And as Kalinda was saying, at the best of times, the holding of the space is more important in our minds and our relationships, to the extent that we all respect the professionalism of the space.
Thank you. Our time has gone much faster than we would have liked, and I really want to thank all of the speakers, particularly as participants. You've availed yourself, you've shared your experiences, your insights and proficiencies in the field have been valuable, informative, and will no doubt benefit all of us as we venture forward. We also want to thank all of those who attended this webinar. I hope you found it as useful as I have. Thanks also to the SAISA executive for this initiative, and of course the office staff for making sure everything works according to plan. I know we've had a few hiccups, but I think largely it's gone according to plan. I've also been asked to let you know that the fourth in SAISA's webinar series will take place at the beginning of December, and that I think will be focusing on education and learning during the pandemic. You will of course receive details in due course. Further, I remind you to complete the survey on the website, which will be helpful in planning future continuing education programs, among others, that the Society is envisaging. So thank you again, and I'm now going to hand you over to the SAISA President, Professor Garth Stevens, who will say a few words and officially close the event. Thank you. Thanks, Garth.
Thanks, Anthony. I hope I'm audible and visible to everybody.
Yeah.
Let me just begin by saying thank you to all of you. This has been fantastic. It's really been great. Thanks, Dylan Evans. Thanks to Khamari Committee. Thanks to Kalinda Linda, to Zambele, and of course to Anthony for his expert moderating and really holding and keeping this together in the way that only Anthony can do. These were really some great insights tonight. It was great to hear your thoughts about how it is that tele-mental health has really, in some ways, been thrust on us by the exigent circumstances of COVID-19. And I suspect is going to be with us in the post-COVID world as well, as technology becomes more and more available to all of us. What was really interesting about the inputs from our four speakers was that they really covered thoughts that were of a conceptual nature. I listened to Kamadi and Kalinda in particular talking about the kind of dimensions of particular modalities, but at the same time, you've also all provided us with a really grounded and candid experiences. Fascinating to listen to some of the work that Dylan's doing, that Zama's doing as well. Very candid and pragmatic, ways of thinking about tele-mental health in the way that we work today. So very much a webinar for me that spoke about both the challenges and the possibilities, about rethinking our theory, about rethinking our practice, and certainly about rethinking our praxis more broadly. I think, again, importantly, that technology is not going to be a panacea for some of the challenges that we face around population well-being and population mental health. But certainly, it does offer us an opportunity to challenge some of the sacred cows that perhaps many of us have taken for granted as regimes of truth in the way that we've been trained and the way that we've, of course, practiced over many years. Anthony's already spoken a little bit about the webinars that we've had. Actually, this is the fourth one, and we have a fifth one coming up. But effectively, we've done one on race and psychology, one on gender-based harm, one on peace, safety, and human rights, and of course, this evening, one on tele-mental health. The fifth webinar that we'll be hosting will really be on educational psychology and the digital divide. And we were doing this partly because we wanted to ensure that there was a footprint and an engagement with not only the members of SAISA, but also multiple publics, either practitioners or non-practitioners for that matter, during a period where we would normally have had access to people through Congress, through all kinds of other face-to-face engagements. You can probably tell from the content of the 5 webinars that we've had and that we will be having, is that we've really tried to ensure the kind of interface or nexus between social justice, science, practice, and psychology. And alongside these webinars, of course, we've put in place a raft of other work that's really hopefully increased our footprint. Ironically, in a year when we were not able to see each other in face-to-face contact, we probably saw more of you. Thousands of people were on webinars over the course of the last few months. In fact, tonight alone, I think at its peak, we hit 800 people on this particular webinar, which is really fantastic again. And I'm really thrilled that so many people tuned in. Of course, we've done other work related to resource packages and networking across multiple organizations. I'm thrilled to see so many people from other organizations who have joined in as participants, but also people like Kalinda, Zamo, and really coming from other institutional locations. It's great to have you all with us. One of the things that we've, of course, been saying as CISA is that in this moment, it is really critical for us to think about the way that we work as being directed towards plural organizational forms. Actually, there's no single organization that comes to represent everything that we all need. But it really is critical to build organizations in this particular moment. Whether this is CISA, and I say this as the president of CISA at the moment and from the presidency, but whether it's for CISA or any other organization, I really encourage all of you to think very deeply about how it is that we build organizations, because organizations are really the lifeblood of civil society and an active citizenry. And certainly as a member of the presidency in CISA, I want to say, I encourage you to think about joining us at some point. These are not pledges that we make for life when we join organizations. We join them when we think that they are sound organizational vehicles to do the work that we're all wanting to do. And my own experience of CISA in the last while certainly has been that this is a collectively driven process. We only get to do this if we are collective. And I really want to encourage you all that if you're thinking about the kind of service that we provide as a set of practitioners, as a profession, and certainly as a science, then the only way to do this in a way that is robust and relevant is to do this as a collective. So if you're thinking about joining an organization, now is the time to do this. We really need you, and we look forward to your participation. With that, I want to kind of return to our panelists this evening, and I want to say that really, in some ways, you've all spoken through CISA to multiple publics. And again, it speaks to this idea of multiple publics, plural organizational forms, and really thinking about the work that we do in deep, deep collectives. Thank you for the critical and engaged conversation, not only for, but also about the practice of psychotherapy in the time of COVID and beyond. I look forward to a time again when we can say hello to all of you at our next webinar on the 2nd of December. Anthony's already spoken about this. He's already dealt with some of the housekeeping matters around the survey and CPD. At this point, I want to say to you all, we wish you well for this evening. Stay well. Thank you for your attendance. And we hope that you continue to aspire to the pinnacle of serving humanity. Thank you, everybody, and good night.
Thank you. Good night.